The glass doors of the corporate tower slid open without ceremony. No announcement. No escort. No flashing cameras. Just a man walking in quietly. He wore a worn leather jacket, dark jeans, and old sneakers that had clearly seen better days. His hair was slightly unkempt. No tie. No polished shoes. No visible status. The lobby was everything he wasn't. Marble floors. Crystal lighting. A massive company logo stretching across the wall like a declaration of power. Employees moved quickly, heels clicking, phones pressed to ears, voices sharp and important. The kind of building where people measured worth in titles and tailored suits. He walked to the reception desk. The receptionist looked up briefly, her expression professionally neutral, until she took in his appearance. "Yes. I'd like to speak with the board," he said calmly. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." A short pause. The kind filled with silent judgment. "I'm afraid you'll have to wait," she replied, gesturing toward a row of chairs near the wall. Not unkind, but dismissive. He nodded once. Of course. No protest. No explanation. He sat down. From where he was seated, he could see the executive floor through the glass partition. Laughter spilled out from a boardroom where men in expensive suits clinked glasses, celebrating something. Two employees walked past him. One slowed slightly, glanced at his jacket, then leaned toward the other and whispered something that ended in a quiet smirk. He noticed. He noticed everything. 7 minutes passed. No one asked his name. No one offered water. No one wondered why he seemed so calm. Because calm doesn't look powerful. And power in that building only wore designer labels. What none of them realized was this. The quiet man in the old sneakers wasn't lost. He wasn't job hunting. He wasn't waiting for approval. He owned 53% of the company whose logo towered above them. And today he hadn't come for recognition. He had come for the truth. Most of the people working in that building had only ever seen his name on paper. Quarterly reports. Shareholder summaries. Digital signatures at the bottom of strategic approvals. Keanu Reeves. Co-founder. Majority shareholder. Silent partner. 53% ownership. More than half of everything around them, the marble floors, the glass walls, the executive bonuses, the very chairs they sat on, legally belonged to him. And yet, no one in that lobby recognized him. That wasn't an accident. Years earlier, when the company was just an idea sketched on napkins and fueled by ambition, Keanu had been everywhere. Pitching, negotiating, building systems from the ground up. But once it became successful, he stepped back. No interviews. No press photos. No public appearances at corporate events. He believed something simple. If a company depends on one face to function, it's weak. So he let others take the spotlight. He stayed behind the curtain. Emails replaced handshakes. Video calls replaced boardroom entrances. Signatures replaced speeches. The executives grew comfortable with that arrangement. Too comfortable. Over time, leadership shifted. New directors were hired. Policies changed. Culture evolved, or rather, eroded. Employee complaints increased. Turnover quietly rose. Anonymous internal surveys painted a picture that didn't match the polished annual reports. Words like intimidating, dismissive, disconnected. But on paper, profits were still rising. And in corporate environments, rising profits silence many concerns. Until they don't. That morning, Keanu hadn't come unannounced to intimidate anyone. He hadn't come to make a dramatic entrance. He had come because numbers tell one story. People tell another. He wanted to see which one was true. From his seat in the lobby, he observed everything with the patience of someone who didn't need to prove anything. The receptionist avoided eye contact now, occasionally glancing at him as if worried he might still be there at closing time. An intern hurried by, arms full of files, nearly bumping into him, then muttered a distracted apology without actually looking at his face. Two senior managers exited the elevator, laughing loudly about a deal closing that afternoon. "Once this goes through, we're untouchable," one of them said confidently. Untouchable. Interesting word. Keanu leaned back slightly in his chair. He wasn't angry. He wasn't offended. If anything, he seemed thoughtful. Because how people treat someone who appears unimportant reveals more than how they treat someone powerful. Respect given upward is strategy. Respect given downward is character. Another 10 minutes passed. No one asked who he was. No one questioned why a stranger seemed so at ease in a space built on hierarchy. In their minds, he had already been categorized. Probably lost. Maybe underdressed for an interview. Definitely not significant. And that assumption, that quiet dismissal, was exactly what he had come to test. Upstairs in the boardroom, discussions were intensifying. A confidential acquisition proposal sat on the polished table. A proposal he had not approved. A proposal that, if signed, would change the future of the company and possibly cost hundreds of employees their roles. But down here in the lobby, no one knew that. They only saw an ordinary man in old sneakers. They didn't realize they were being observed. They didn't realize this quiet morning was about to become a turning point. Time moves differently when you're being ignored. For most people in the lobby, it was just another busy morning. For Keanu, it was a study in behavior. He sat quietly, hands folded, posture relaxed. Not slouched. Not defensive. Just observant. Across the room, a large digital screen displayed the company's core values. Integrity. Respect. People first. He glanced at it for a moment. Then back at the people walking past him. A group of mid-level managers exited the elevator, deep in conversation about performance targets. One of them slowed when he noticed Keanu. Interview? The man asked casually, not unkind, just dismissive. Keanu looked up. No. The manager gave a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. HR's on the third floor, he said, assuming. I know where everything is, Keanu replied calmly. The man chuckled awkwardly and walked off. Assumptions. Again. Behind the reception desk, the phone rang. Yes, they're all in the boardroom, the receptionist said into the receiver. Celebrating the acquisition. Acquisition. So it was moving forward. Interesting. Two executives passed through the lobby doors, their voices low but confident. If we finalize this today, we cut operating costs by at least 30%. And staff. Some restructuring is unavoidable. They didn't lower their voices further. Why would they? In their minds, the quiet man by the wall didn't matter. One of them glanced at him briefly. That look, quick, evaluative, was enough to categorize him. Not important. Not influential. Not relevant. They continued walking. Keanu's expression didn't change. But internally, pieces were connecting. He had read the proposal summary the night before. Vague language. Strategic realignment. Efficiency optimization. Corporate phrases that often meant one thing. People would lose jobs. And yet no one had called him. No one had requested formal approval. Which meant one of two things. They assumed he wouldn't show up. Or they assumed he wouldn't care. Neither was accurate. A young employee stepped into the lobby holding a stack of documents. She looked stressed, shoulders tight, movements rushed. She approached reception. I need these signed before the vote, she whispered urgently. Boardroom, the receptionist replied without looking up. The employee turned and nearly collided with Keanu. Oh, I'm sorry, she said quickly, adjusting the files. He offered a small nod. You seem busy, he said. They're rushing everything, she admitted quietly, then stopped herself. Sorry? I shouldn't. It's okay, he said gently. She hesitated for a second, as if sensing something different about him. Not status, not authority, just presence. Then she hurried toward the executive hallway. That brief exchange stood out. She hadn't dismissed him. She hadn't evaluated him by appearance. She simply responded as one human to another. Upstairs, laughter erupted again. The boardroom doors were slightly ajar now. Through the glass, Keanu could see raised glasses. Smiles. Confident body language. They were celebrating before the decision was finalized. Confidence or arrogance. Another 15 minutes passed. Still no one had asked his name. No one had offered basic courtesy beyond transactional politeness. Not hostility. Just indifference. And indifference can be louder than insult. He stood slowly. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Just enough movement to shift the energy of the room. The receptionist looked up again. Sir, you'll need authorization to go back there, she said firmly as he stepped toward the executive hallway. Keanu stopped in front of her desk. For the first time, he placed a simple card on the counter. Her eyes dropped to read it, then widened. Color drained from her face. Because the name printed on that card wasn't just a visitor. It was the foundation of the entire building. And in that moment, the dynamic of the morning shifted, completely. Keanu walked calmly down the hallway. No rush. No flourish. No announcement. Just measured steps. The boardroom doors were open. Inside, executives were mid-conversation, glasses raised, laughter echoing off the polished walls. Expensive suits. Expensive watches. Expensive arrogance. A junior manager noticed him first. Who? She started. Keanu didn't answer. He walked straight to the center of the room, eyes scanning the faces around him. There was a brief pause, almost imperceptible, but it was enough for everyone to sense that something was different. A senior executive leaned back in his chair, smirking. "And you are?" he said, trying to mask his unease with authority. Keanu placed a single card on the table. The room went silent. All laughter stopped. Glasses paused midair. Watches glittered, but the shine no longer mattered. The card read simply, Keanu Reeves, co-founder and majority shareholder. There was a collective intake of breath. Faces shifted from confident to pale. Smiles vanished. Conversations froze. The arrogance that had filled the room evaporated in an instant. "No, that's impossible," muttered one executive, eyes darting toward his colleagues. "Yes, it's him," said another, voice trembling slightly. He's been the silent owner all along?" Keanu didn't speak. Not yet. He let them feel the weight of their assumptions. The room was alive with shock, guilt, and disbelief, all wrapped in an uncomfortable silence. He walked slowly to the head of the table. His presence alone altered the energy in the room. The employees who had been celebrating only moments before now avoided eye contact, some fidgeting with pens, others straightening their jackets nervously. Finally, one executive found the courage to speak. What are you doing here?" he asked, voice shaky, trying to regain some control. Keanu's eyes scanned the table. Calm, unrushed, observant. "I came to see," he said softly, "how people behave when they think they are in control, when they think no one is watching." Another senior manager swallowed hard, realizing the truth in his words. They had all behaved as if this man in the lobby, the one in old sneakers and a leather jacket, didn't exist. They had ignored him, judged him, treated him as irrelevant. And now they were faced with the reality that he had been watching all along. A few whispered among themselves, trying to explain the card, the unannounced arrival, the audacity of it all. But no words could cover the weight of the silence Keanu commanded. He took a seat at the table. Not at the head, he didn't need theatrics, but wherever he chose to place himself. His calmness amplified the tension in the room. The employees realized something crucial. This wasn't a confrontation about business. It was a lesson about character. About arrogance. About respect. About seeing value in people regardless of their appearance, position, or attire. For years they had measured worth by power, suits, and title. But here he was, quiet, composed, unassuming, and yet more powerful than any of them could imagine. They finally understood. And the shock of that realization, the silent knowledge that they had misjudged him entirely, was only the beginning. Keanu waited. Let the lesson settle. Let the arrogance reveal itself. Because some truths aren't told. They are observed. The boardroom was silent. Glass walls reflected pale faces. Laughter, drinks, and whispered deals from just moments ago had vanished completely. Keanu's calm presence dominated the space. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't demanded attention, yet the room had shifted entirely. Every executive felt it. The realization that the person they had ignored, judged, and underestimated was the one who controlled everything they had been celebrating. Before anyone could recover, the door opened again. An employee stepped in, her hands shaking as she carried a thick stack of files. She stopped mid-step when she saw Keanu at the table. Her eyes flicked nervously between him and the stunned executives. They were planning to sell the company," she said, voice barely above a whisper. The room collectively froze. Papers rattled in hands. Coffee cups paused midair. Secret deals. Hidden transfers. Millions in unapproved funds shifting under the radar. Hundreds of jobs at risk. And all of this, orchestrated while they had celebrated as if nothing could touch them. Keanu picked up one of the files, flipping through it casually as if reading a newspaper. But every signature, every spreadsheet, every confidential note confirmed what he already knew. The executives had been moving forward without oversight, assuming they could manipulate outcomes without consequence. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked, voice low but piercing. "Not just financially, but ethically?" They looked at each other, unsure who should answer. Some avoided eye contact completely, realizing too late that the game they thought they controlled had been watched, analyzed, and anticipated. "The sale would have cost hundreds of employees their livelihoods," Keanu continued. "And you planned it behind closed doors, without transparency, without accountability." One executive swallowed hard, his confidence replaced by guilt. We thought we could streamline operations." "Streamline operations?" Keanu echoed. "You call risking jobs and betraying trust streamlining? Do you even understand what you were doing?" Pause. The room was heavy with tension. Some executives opened their mouths to speak, but no words came. They realized that arguing wouldn't matter. The facts were clear, the cards had been laid bare. Keanu set the files down and leaned back slightly. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't panicking. He was calm, a storm of quiet authority that made every misstep feel monumental. "This isn't about arrogance," he said. "It's about character. It's about how you behave when you think no one is watching. And now, the truth is in front of you." Heads nodded slowly, some in shame, some in disbelief. The arrogance that had allowed them to proceed unchecked now seemed foolish. He picked up another card, the same simple white one from the lobby. He held it up for everyone to see. Majority shareholder. Co-founder. Observer. Not a visitor. Not a stranger. But someone whose responsibility is to protect this company and everyone in it, including the people you plan to disregard. The weight of his words settled over them. The room was no longer just a space for boardroom politics. It was a classroom, and Keanu had become the lesson. And then, just as quietly as he had entered, he paused. Eyes scanning the executives. Hands resting on the table. No theatrics. Just presence. "Everyone here has a choice," he said. "You can continue believing that your titles protect you. Or you can recognize that respect, transparency, and accountability matter more than power. That integrity isn't negotiable. That leadership isn't about privilege, it's about responsibility." A few tried to nod, some rubbed their temples. The silence was deafening. Every second stretched long, heavy, and unavoidable. Then the employee with the files stepped forward again, courage replacing her nerves. We can reverse the deal," she said. "We can protect the employees. Make corrections before anything happens." Keanu's gaze softened slightly. "Yes," he said. "Because mistakes can be corrected. But arrogance? That leaves permanent marks." He placed the files back on the table, leaning slightly forward. "This is the bigger truth," he said. "Power without accountability is dangerous. Disrespect disguised as oversight is destructive. And assuming your judgment is superior without perspective is reckless." The executives finally absorbed it. Some were pale. Some whispered apologies. Some stared blankly as if processing years of misjudgment. And in that moment, they realized that their celebration had been premature. That their assumption of control had been wrong. That their arrogance had been exposed. Keanu didn't celebrate. He didn't scold. He didn't gloat. He simply allowed the truth to exist in the room, heavy and undeniable. Because sometimes the lesson doesn't need shouting. It only needs observation. And the people who ignore that lesson, learn it the hard way. The boardroom was thick with tension, the kind that presses against your chest and makes every breath feel deliberate. Keanu sat at the table, calm and collected, as the executives shifted nervously in their chairs. Their earlier confidence had melted into uncertainty, replaced by the heavy awareness that the man in front of them wasn't just any observer. He had the power to undo everything they thought they controlled. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam his hand on the table. He simply looked at each person in turn, letting the weight of his presence settle over them. "I didn't come here to be recognized," he said softly, his voice steady and deliberate. "I came to see how you treat people you think don't matter." A silence filled the room, unbroken, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Every executive understood immediately, this wasn't about his identity. This was about their behavior, their arrogance, their choices. Some tried to justify themselves. "We were acting in the company's best interest," one muttered, fingers gripping the armrests. "We didn't." "Best interest?" Keanu interrupted gently. "Best interest for whom? Certainly not for the people you were willing to disregard. Not for the employees whose lives would have been upended by the hidden sale. And certainly not for the company you claimed to serve." He paused, letting the words sink in. Eyes darted around the room. Some avoided his gaze entirely, others met it briefly then looked down. The arrogance that had once filled the air was gone. The room was quiet, except for the occasional shuffle of a chair or nervous cough. Keanu reached for the stack of files the young employee had brought in. He flipped through them slowly, deliberately, showing the executives every unauthorized signature, every hidden transfer, every confidential deal made without oversight. Each page confirmed what they already feared. Their actions had been exposed. "This isn't just about mistakes," he said. "It's about integrity. It's about character. And it's about respect." A few tried to defend themselves further. We thought it was necessary." "Necessary?" he echoed, his voice firm but calm. "You call betrayal and deception necessary? You call cutting corners and putting livelihoods at risk necessary? The room went still. No one spoke. Keanu stood. Not with anger, not with theatrics, but with authority that could not be ignored. The energy in the room shifted instantly. The executives who had laughed and celebrated minutes ago now felt small, insignificant, and exposed. "I am making a decision," he said, slowly walking around the table. Each step deliberate, measured, like the ticking of a clock counting down the moment they realized their positions no longer mattered. "Your behavior has consequences. Your arrogance has consequences. Your lack of respect has consequences." He paused, looking each person in the eye. The weight of his gaze was enough to make them rethink every choice they had made in the past months, every decision driven by ego rather than principle. "Effective immediately," he said. "You are all removed from your positions of authority. Temporary or permanent, depending on your willingness to reflect and rebuild trust. Security will escort you out of the building." A few gasped. Others froze, unable to comprehend the swiftness of the judgment. Some whispered to each other, shock mixing with fear. Keanu turned to the young employee who had brought the files in. "You did the right thing by coming forward," he said softly. "Truth matters more than fear. And accountability matters more than loyalty to the wrong people." He glanced around the room one last time. The executives who had once believed themselves untouchable now understood the reality of power. It wasn't about suits, titles, or public recognition. It was about responsibility. And responsibility demanded respect, for the people, for the company, and for the principles that guided both. Security entered quietly as instructed. They escorted the executives from the room without incident. The boardroom, once alive with celebration and arrogance, now felt empty, yet strangely lighter. The tension remained, but so did a sense of possibility, a chance to rebuild with integrity. Keanu walked back to the head of the table and sat down. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos that had filled the room moments ago. "This isn't about punishment," he said, voice soft but firm. "It's about understanding. It's about reflection. It's about making sure the people we serve, employees, clients, stakeholders, are never treated as expendable." The employees who had witnessed the events quietly gathered. Whispers of relief and disbelief filled the air. Fear had been replaced by understanding. Respect had been restored, not because it was demanded, but because it had been earned through action. Keanu looked around the room one last time, calm and composed. He hadn't sought attention. He hadn't sought revenge. He had sought truth. And truth, once revealed, had reshaped everything. Backhand index pointing right. If you believe respect and integrity matter more than status like this. Backhand index pointing right. Would you have acted differently if you were in Keanu's shoes? The boardroom, once a stage for celebration and quiet scheming, now felt almost sacred in its silence. The executives who had been removed were gone, escorted quietly by security. Their absence left a strange emptiness, one that carried both tension and clarity. Keanu Reeves stood in the center of the room, surveying the space with calm precision. His leather jacket, slightly worn, and old sneakers contrasted sharply with the polished environment. Yet his presence outshone any suit or title in the room. He had not come to be acknowledged. He had come to observe, to understand, and to act. And now his work here was nearly complete. Employees who had been hidden in corners, observing from a distance, stepped forward slowly. Fear lingered in their eyes, a natural response to seeing power shift so abruptly. But as they looked at Keanu, they noticed something they had not expected. There was no arrogance in him, no anger, only quiet authority and unwavering fairness. "Your jobs are safe," he said, his voice carrying evenly across the room. Relief spread immediately. People exhaled, some with tears of gratitude, others with stunned disbelief. He allowed a moment for the reality to sink in. Employees had witnessed firsthand what happens when arrogance and disregard for others go unchecked. They had seen the consequences of dismissing someone based on appearance, status, or assumptions. And they had seen how integrity and presence of mind could instantly shift the balance of power. "This company," Keanu continued, "will never judge people by the clothes they wear, the title they hold, or the office they occupy. True character is shown in how we treat those we think have no power. Not because it is convenient, not because someone is watching, but because it is the right thing to do." A few of the more senior employees nodded slowly, understanding the weight of the statement. Years of hierarchy, assumptions, and silent judgments had been undone in a single morning, and yet Keanu had delivered a lesson without shouting, without spectacle. He had simply acted with integrity. One young employee, still holding the files that had exposed the planned sale, approached him cautiously. I didn't know what would happen when I brought this," she admitted softly. I just knew it wasn't right. Keanu looked at her, and for the first time, a faint smile appeared. You did the right thing. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes it shows up quietly, exactly when it is needed. Today you were that courage. He turned back to the rest of the employees. I didn't come here to punish. I didn't come to humiliate. I came to ensure the truth was clear, that respect and integrity are non-negotiable. That arrogance, when left unchecked, reveals itself in ways that are irreversible. And that leadership is not about privilege, but about responsibility. A few employees whispered to each other. Some were shaking their heads, still processing the rapid chain of events. One by one, they began to understand. The lesson of the morning wasn't just about corporate hierarchy. It was about human behavior, judgment, and the power of observation. Remember this, Keanu said, his voice steady, firm but not harsh. The world will often treat you based on assumptions. Appearances are deceptive. Power can be silent. And respect, real respect, is earned through actions, not titles. Never forget that your treatment of others defines who you are, far more than any position or status ever could. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Every corner of the room felt charged with understanding, reflection, and newfound commitment. Today was about more than me or the company or the files, he continued. It was about what kind of environment we want to build. About the culture we want to foster. About the message we send to every single person who walks through these doors. That they matter. That their voice matters. That their dignity matters. He stepped back, scanning the room one last time. The employees stood straighter, shoulders lifted, eyes clearer. Fear had been replaced with understanding. Confusion replaced with clarity. Anxiety replaced with purpose. And remember this, he said softly but firmly, being ignored doesn't mean you are powerless. Being judged by appearance doesn't define your worth. Sometimes those who seem small, quiet, or ordinary hold the greatest influence. And sometimes arrogance blinds those who believe they hold all the power. He took a deep breath and allowed a final moment of silence. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a performance. It was a pause, a recognition of the truth that had just unfolded. Then, with calm authority, he concluded, let this be the standard. Let this be the lesson. Let integrity, respect, and accountability guide every decision from now on. And remember, the measure of your character is how you treat those who seem to have none. That is the real power. The employees, inspired and relieved, slowly began to applaud. Not out of obligation, not out of fear, but out of recognition for the lesson they had witnessed, and for the leader who had quietly shown them the path. Keanu smiled faintly, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the door. He had made his point. The lesson was clear. And the legacy of this morning would linger far longer than the memory of any sale, deal, or executive meeting. Outside the boardroom, the world continued as usual. But inside, a fundamental truth had been reinforced. Arrogance may command attention for a moment, but respect earned through integrity lasts a lifetime. Backhand index pointing right. Do you think Keanu made the right decision? Backhand index pointing right. Should the executives have faced harsher consequences? Speech balloon comment below. Thumbs up like if respect should be unconditional. Repeat button. Share this with someone who needs this reminder.